Okay, so recording has started. So welcome everyone to, I guess the first meetup that we're holding for 2023, but also it's our 4 year, yeah, our 4th year anniversary, and the first event we held in terms of tying it back to something that we were talking about before we kicked the recording off. It was actually when Michael Niehaus was in. So this was basically originally hastily organized around Michael Niehaus being in Sydney for one of the Ignite, or what were the Ignite Live or Ignite Tour, Ignite International events.
Oh,
so
like the cut down versions?
Yeah. So basically it was, it was something that was sort of quickly organized, or that kind of, it was something we'd been talking about, but it was like, okay, we've got a fantastic guest, opening guest speaker. We'll start strong.
Yep.
So basically, so 4 years. Who would have thought that 2 of those years we would have been locked down and not allowed to go anywhere? Or maybe not exactly 2 years, but it kind of feels like it these days.
Hey, for Melbourne, it was 2 years.
Yeah, going on 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this month Steve isn't able to join us this month. He's got an emergency that he has to deal with, but he should be good for next month. So what that means is any of the outstanding items that we have today, any of the questions we can't answer or that we don't want to answer, unless Steve objects in the next 15 seconds, we are going to assign them to Steve. So I think if you know how this works, if you're not here, you either get blamed for things, or you take on responsibility that you weren't aware of.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that if in doubt, it's Steve's fault. So
yeah,
if anything bad has happened in the last 6 months, it's Steve's fault.
Okay, so just a quick introduction on my side. My name's Mark O'Shea, and I'll sort of just hand over to Ben and Jerome just to do some quick intros as well, in case. I'm pretty sure everyone's been here previously, but let's just make sure.
Sure. I'll go first. My name's Ben. I am Intune MVP. I work at Patch My PC as one of the devs on the team there. I do a lot of stuff around automation for Intune and Config Manager and all that fun stuff. And I am happy to be here.
Okay, that's my turn, I think.
It is.
I'm Jeroen from the Netherlands, and I'm sitting in the car right now. It's 8:15, so I'm also the Modern Workplace consultant and Microsoft trainer, and let's see what spring this year also, and let's start, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what I was thinking with today is that even though strictly what we're about to talk about isn't really here are things that you need to think about this year, I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about is stuff that you either need to think about this quarter as well as for the rest of the year and moving forward. So I didn't really want to do a New Year's resolution type of thing, but instead focusing on, I guess, probably the big change that's coming through that I'm sure there's a lot of people that aren't aware of it yet, is that Store for Business and Store for Education are, in Microsoft's words, being retired sometime this quarter. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I haven't seen anything public facing where they're saying, which part of the quarter it is. So I will work on the assumption with no factual basis to it that it's going to be end of quarter.
Mm-hmm.
I think because normally if it's something that they're sort of thinking it's going to be pretty early or mid, they normally get a little bit more specific. But because they're just sort of still saying quarter and they're talking about something retiring, my guess here is that because they haven't given specific dates around it, they've got to be careful about springing it on us too quickly. So just making sure that we've got a few things here that we can sort of talk about that I'm sure all of you are probably already aware of some of these things, but there's a couple of little things just to sort of watch out for with the retirement of that store. And now what that means, and I think the last session we had, I think was mid-November, but the Winget getting publicly, or the Winget integration with Intune, I don't think that actually went, I don't even know, is it GA or is it still preview?
I believe it's, that's a good question. I haven't actually been in the portal in a very long time. Last time we spoke about it, it was very much in public preview. I believe it's left that, or actually, you know what? I'm not going to lie. I'm just going to check now.
Okay, so I will use the term, even if it's not technically in preview, it's very preview-ish in terms of current functionality.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and now I'm looking at clocks. Sorry.
It's still in preview, I think.
Yeah. Let me switch tenants. Show of hands, who's actually playing around with Winget in the Intune portal or the Endpoint Manager portal?
I did one time, I think, 2 times.
Mm-hmm. What do we got here?
Yeah, because at the moment, I think it's like, at least from sort of the poking around I did with it, it seems like it's really only the traditional or the MS store whose apps you can publish or assign, but the others from the other repo are showing up anyway, but it gives you an error message on them.
Yeah. So okay, just to clarify, if you are simply running through the Endpoint Manager portal, it is classified as Microsoft Store app brackets new, and it is currently in preview. Now, this doesn't say public or private preview, which generally means that this is public preview. So it is still a thing that people can play around with. But as you said, the current intent for this is that the things that you can access are in the store repository. But you know, the core benefit of what Winget is actually greater than just the store. This is the idea that we are finally becoming first-class citizens with Linux, where we have app repositories or software repositories as a primary lever for accessing software, which I wholeheartedly think is fantastic. But right now, the idea is that everything in here is only things that are accessible from the store, which I would assume the idea here is that arguably that means it's been vetted a little more than just the Wild West that is the Winget repository. But you know, I haven't spent a lot of time to actually vet that content.
Yeah, and I'll talk about some of that stuff as we go through, because there's a couple of good bits of, so not stuff that's really covered in official documentation, but in a couple of different comments sections in different places, there's actually some good conversations going on in there, which is kind of filling in some of the gaps about things that haven't really been announced or confirmed or denied or anything along those lines. So we'll definitely get into that. So then once we get into the Winget piece, this is really where we'll just be talking about the I guess there's 2 parts to the Winget conversation. There's the Winget as it's currently integrated with Intune, but then as Ben has sort of mentioned, there's Winget as basically a command line tool for you to do what you want with. And I think what we'll see for quite a while is that anyone who jumps in and starts working with it at the command line, it's probably going to be hard to go back to or there'll be some things where it's going to be, it's going to be a tough call around, do you go through and basically, effectively roll your own way of deploying things versus just using the convenience of Intune. And this will make, if you haven't really looked at this too closely, like some of this stuff, it's like you sort of look at Winget at the command line, and you go, okay, some of this stuff is really cool. But then there's also things where it's like, well, hang on, how do I actually manage it if I'm using Intune? There's still a bit of weirdness there, but I think it's kind of weird because even though we could argue that it's still very early days for Winget, how long, if it's something that we're supposed to be relying on to replace Store for Business that retires within the next few months, we can't, anyone who's saying, oh, Winget's still new, we'll say, well, they shouldn't have retired the store if Winget doesn't give us that functionality. But we'll sort of see a few more things about that. But let's sort of just jump in quickly then. And just anyone who is new or who hasn't made an appearance for a while, if you do just want to do like a quick intro,
classic IT crowd.
Oh, so yes, so Ben, even your question about the Winget new store stuff, there's a couple of names as we go through some of the comments, etc., that might point you in the right direction for some of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just seeing what Quock's typing in. Okay, well, while Quock's typing in, let's just sort of jump in quickly and talk about, I guess, a couple of the, maybe the additional side effects of Store for Business / education retiring that people aren't really thinking about too much. Now, looking at that list, I think, so Brian Keller, I'm pretty sure he is the person whose responses to comments are the ones that are worth their weight in gold. And I'll basically point out to a couple of different things where one in particular where he was sort of dropping in some really good responses to some of the questions. Now, just a few things here in terms of the store retirement. So as we said, the most specific details we've got is this quarter, but it's, I don't know. It's like there was so much promise around what the store could do that it never really took off. So I think it's one of those usual things where it's the people who get on board early and buy into, here's what Microsoft is doing, let's get on board with them. I think this is that usual situation where they're the ones who kind of suffer with these changes. Now, in this case, though, I think it's, for most people who've used Store for Business, they've used it very lightly. So, it's like, okay, what are the apps I've got that I can get? What free apps can I get from the store and then, assign through Intune or whatever? And I'd say that, never having seen any numbers around it, that would have to be a pretty significant percent of the usage of Business Store. Now, Store for Education, I think that is potentially a different story, because that's where I think the potential for additional, people sort of be going through working with education, products that are licensed to education, that maybe there's licensing integration, et cetera, that was used, or they were purchased for X number of users and then reassigned at the beginning of each year or things like that. But even then, I think a lot of that model of buying the licenses that way, a lot of this stuff, from when, when was Business Store first introduced? Like 6 or 7 years ago?
Yeah.
The software world has moved much more towards, online subscriptions, as opposed to back then, the world was still moving in that direction. It was still a lot of cases where it's like the store may have delivered it, but you may have still had to put in a product key or something like that in order to activate. So I think that side of it, it's kind of the issue. I won't say the issue has completely remediated itself, because there'll still be people with versions of apps that haven't moved, or apps that haven't moved over to a subscription model. But I don't think it's overall, I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, except for the people who really did embrace it strongly. Whereas most people just used it as a convenience, as opposed to really using all of the framework that was built around it. Now, some of the other things that we'll sort of just talk about, pretty quickly as we go through here is, there are some assigned roles that you may have floating around in there if you've worked with it before. So probably just going in and just checking on it, cleaning it up, making sure that if this thing is retiring, just pulling people out of those roles to make sure that you don't have these, I'm not saying that there'll be phantom roles floating around that are going to cause problems in the future, but stranger things have happened, where it's like, why can this person do that? They've never been assigned this thing directly. And it's like, oh, it's because they were doing this thing in private store 7 years ago. And so, yeah, we'll just sort of talk about some of those. And then probably one that, once again, this is something that's only going to impact a certain segment, but some of the changes or things you need to think about with device guard and signing of apps there. Now, for the roles in here, now here where it says admin, it is not a store admin role. This is global admin.
Right. Okay.
So this is one of those things that I'm pretty sure for like, and this is just like kind of like a history lesson of Azure AD when you didn't have a lot of granularity in roles. So, you know, when you go into tenants that were set up pretty early that haven't been, you know, haven't had a good security audit of roles and permissions, you generally find that they had good reasons to use global admin accounts at certain points in time, but they don't realize that, hey, these different things can be broken out. You can do stuff without being global admin. But otherwise, the other roles that you've got in there, the purchaser, now here, the device guard signer, that's really just about going through and configuring the device guard settings. You've got 2 different purchaser roles in there as well. But with these, just sort of making sure that as this is moving towards retirement, just like, so the global admin, that's something that you should be monitoring anyway. But the purchaser, device guard signer, and basic purchaser, I'd just be going through and pulling people out of those groups. Like, or going through and seeing, you know, how is it assigned? Is it assigned to a group? Is it assigned, individuals being assigned those permissions? And just clean that stuff up before it disappears, or before, or in some cases where you might find where some of these things disappear. But when you're looking at what groups users are members of, now I've never seen this in Azure AD, but I've definitely seen it in AD where things have been deleted or renamed, and we end up just seeing a little bit of weirdness in portals for a while until everything gets synchronized and the old stuff gets removed. Now for the device guard side, so in this case, basically the information around this has been available for a while now, but it's really been pushing away from DGSS v2 over to the Azure code signing service. And yeah, so basically anyone who's been using, was using this functionality inside of the store, business store portal, basically just a different, it's a different process now, and going through and using the Azure code signing service. Now, is that something that you've ever looked at, Ben?
Doing Azure code signing for
apps. So just in general, working with it, as opposed to, like, specifically here, they're talking about using it for code integrity. But just in general, have you worked with the code signing service in Azure?
No, I haven't. We've done a lot of work around just like code signing in general, but specifically using that service, no, I haven't played with it.
Yeah, because so it seems that there's kind of like incredibly, like I might be looking in the wrong place, but it just seems like there's very little information out there about it. And like they kind of first raised it about 2 years ago, but then it was only at the last Ignite where they started talking about it again from the look of things. So again, this is, so it's one of those things where, like, I'm sure there is some good documentation, but it's probably over on the developer side, as opposed to on the IT pro side where I'd normally be looking for this stuff.
Yeah, I think this is more for the developers who are packaging installation media and they want to get their stuff signed for inclusion in these delivery mechanisms. So I don't think it's something that like the IT pro space needs to be super concerned about. But it is the idea that, like if software is not signed with these mechanisms, then potentially you do need to question, should we be including this in our delivery? But, I've also got very strong opinions on whether you should care or not about what's in your environment. So,
so let me just grab. So I've got a. Let me just drop a couple of links into chat that I sort of just saved around this stuff. But really here it's, once again, we're sort of talking about, edge case scenario for a lot of this stuff. So probably, unless this is something that you've already sort of had to invest in, probably not all that interesting. Now, the final one, and I just sort of put this in here because I saw some questions around it, was, okay, is there any kind of automatic process for store for business apps just to basically the legacy apps to legacy settings to get moved across to new? And no, no current plans for that. And like, even though you sort of think about it, in theory, it should be a pretty easy process for it to have been done automatically. I kind of understand why they may not want to do it automatically, just in case something gets messed up in terms of group memberships or filtering or things like that. And all of a sudden it starts getting published out to people or devices that should have it, or things along those lines. But again, though, I sort of think here that the usage here for a lot of orgs, I don't think for again, education I think is going to be a bit different here, but for enterprise users, I just don't think there's going to be that many store apps that they're really deploying and managing. Like, unless, because it was like, unless it was someone who, like orgs that sort of looked at, okay, what are the Win32 apps that have been sort of, pushed through there over the last few years, etc. So I guess it's, again, it's something that it would have been nice, but I could sort of see that the time and effort that it would have been to put in to make it perfect. I'm sure for a lot of orgs, it's probably just another good opportunity to review. Do you really need to push this thing out anyway? It might have been something that made sense 4 or 5 years ago that doesn't really make sense today.
I think what a lot of people's experience with the store for business is not necessarily realizing that there are certain applications that come with Windows. Let's go with Windows 11. This was also true with Windows 10, but there's a lot of baked-in applications that aren't actually baked in.
Yeah,
they're maintained and managed by the store. So when I say that applications, I'm talking about Notepad, calculator, these sort of let's call them critical and core business applications that we just assume are there, that quite a lot of organizations will accidentally get rid of when they do their Apex removal scripts that they find on the internet.
Where's Notepad?
Yeah, where's Notepad? Exactly. One of the key things to sort of flag on this no plans to automatically migrate apps from Microsoft Store for Business. Understand that that's because the way that the software is being packaged and delivered is considerably different from how the Store for Business existed previously. The ability to map that stuff is near impossible. It would have been very, very difficult and a lot of engineering work. So essentially what they've said is, let's just do a scorched earth approach here and let's just start from scratch. Understanding that most people, and if anyone on this call disagrees with me here, I'm going to be quite surprised, but most people in enterprise don't actually use the store for software deployment because the store was a little bit of a hot mess. There wasn't a lot of reliable software on there that people used a lot. So I think the decision to migrate away from that in a very sort of scorched earth way was the correct one.
Yeah, it's kind of like ask somebody to list their top 10 iOS apps and then ask someone to list their top 10 Windows Store only apps.
Yeah.
So once you exclude all the Win32 apps and kind of the things that you sort of view as essentials, like calculator and Notepad, as you mentioned, it's a pretty, the list gets a bit tougher there.
Yeah, I think years ago we did an Intune training video where we dove into the store and we just searched for calculator and we ended up with an X-rated calculator store app.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of good stuff on there.
Did it get cut from the video?
No, it did not.
You just didn't, you deployed it, you just didn't open it.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. I'm sure it was on a freemium model.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so on the storefront, it's one of those things where even though anytime Microsoft retires something or makes major changes, of course there's going to be people who are complaining about it, but this is one of those cases where the embrace of the potential of Winget is just completely drowning out the small percentage of people who are complaining that Store for Business is not moving forward. But again, I'll say on the education front, things are quite different there. So I'm pretty sure that education did have a hell of a lot more success in their store in terms of getting things pushed out, etc., for a variety of reasons. But in terms of enterprise, it's it just wasn't it wasn't used to its full potential. For whatever reason, maybe it just didn't meet people's requirements. Maybe they just sort of looked and said, well, okay, now we've got the ability to use it to deploy Win32 apps, but Intune already deploys Win32 apps.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just jump in. And so on the Winget bit piece, we'll just sort of talk about the two different things here. So the first one is just like, just sort of Winget as part of Intune. So like the curated Intune experience, what you get, what you don't get, etc. And then we'll jump in and just talk about some of the things you can do with Winget at the command line, so that if you are playing around with it for the first time, you haven't spent too much time with it, there is some really cool stuff you can do with it. But you have to be careful to make sure that you're looking at it in terms of, is this something that Winget can do, or is this something that the Winget client can do, or is it something that Intune can do with Winget? Because the Intune side is different sets of functionality in terms of what you've got there. And it's not that one is a superset of the other. They're different. Intune is currently store apps and picking and choosing, who or what you're deploying it to. Whereas once you're getting down to the command line, you've got a lot more flexibility there, but it's not, it's not a mass management tool for a bunch of devices. It's something you could push out to a bunch of devices, but it's each device is doing it individually in there. So with Winget, okay, like I've just sort of copied some of the key talking points in here. So it's discover, install, upgrade, remove, and configure apps on Win 10 and Win 11 computers. Now, does anyone know what version of Win 10 it was first included with? Because I just haven't paid attention to, because I've been running insider builds for so long.
Yeah.
Like I've just got no concept of when things are actually added into the GA releases.
Yeah, I think this is one of the downsides to always being on the bleeding edge. I remember installing the Winget client, but when it actually got introduced to Win 10, I'm not sure.
And then there was that period. Sorry, yeah.
I believe it was 21H1, I think.
Okay, yeah. So it wasn't all that long ago in terms of official releases. Now, thankfully, Winget has stopped being racist and treating Irish people with Irish surnames as second-class citizens, because it was doing that for quite a while. And I'm joking about that, but what I mean was that my profile, like my surname, has an apostrophe in it. And remember when this is going back probably a year and a half, 2 years or whatever, and people were going, oh no, this is just the way you do it with Winget. And it's like, watch me type these things in. None of it works. And then finally, after some searching, found out that it was, oh no, you have an apostrophe in your surname. How dare you have a alphabetical character in there?
It is pretty rude.
Yeah, it definitely is. Or even the other day, I had to make a doctor's appointment, and normally in the field for the text, it will say, invalid character. No, this let me get to the next screen and would bomb out on the next screen where I had to choose the time of a booking, and it just wouldn't let me hit continue. But also the Microsoft, the physical store, in-person visits.
Right.
They also did not like apostrophes. So talk about not following their internal speeches about inclusion. I'm not going to hassle Quack about this. If Steve was here, I'd hassle Steve about it.
Come on, Mark. It costs $30 to change your name legally in Australia.
But apostrophe is a lot of letters to add in between O and Shay.
Yeah, but it's not per letter.
And that's the way I've worked. That's the way that I've worked around it in some places, so that people have trouble pronouncing it. And it's like, no, I've done that deliberately. That is not my surname. Yeah. So here it's so Win 10 and Win 11 support, and as it's mentioning, it's the client interface to the Windows Package Manager. Now, this Windows Package Manager, I wanted to just sort of call this one out in particular because what you're going to find is as you start working with, even if you're not using Winget directly, even if you're just using the consumer store, and you're somebody who just wants to monitor where is this stuff coming from, what is triggering the download and installation of these things, you'll already start seeing that WPM is also going to be kicking in. You're also going to be seeing some different URLs or IP addresses versus what you're normally seeing for Microsoft's distribution points in here. The other thing that I noticed with this, and I'm pretty sure it was with Adobe, where basically the stub installer came from one set of infrastructure, but then when it started delivering the apps, they were coming through from a completely different range of servers or services. And I think that's some of the stuff that makes me a little bit nervous here, because if people are sort of looking at going, well, why is some traffic coming from here and some traffic going from there? It's, there'll be, in some orgs, I'm pretty sure that might set off, some kind of, investigation. Is this a supply chain attack? Is it a man in the middle attack? Something along those lines. Why am I connecting to here, but the traffic is coming from there? So hopefully we get some better guidance around this. So effectively what this means is that there might be a better way to put this, but with a lot of this stuff that you'll be doing with Winget, don't expect delivery optimization to do much for you. Is that a nice way of putting it, Ben? Is there a better way I could put it?
No, you can't. So it's worth pointing out that for very obvious reasons, Microsoft is not storing the installation media of third-party vendors' software in a place where they can leverage the ability to do delivery optimization.
Yep.
That's why you don't get it. And that's why you get it when you package an Intune Win or a Win32 application, because you're essentially building the package, putting it in a location where you can leverage the fact that you know where it's from and it is within, the walls of Azure, essentially.
Yeah, the walled garden. Yeah,
exactly.
Hang on, I just have to go to the front door. My neighbor's cat is banging on the keys in the door because she wants to get out.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But yeah, so the idea functionally is that Winget or WPM, whatever you want to call it, is just hosting metadata around how to install a product. But at the time of essentially compile, or when you request to install a product, it is going, okay, no problems, I'll get that, and it reaches out to the internet to pull that content down. This is a good design decision because it essentially pushes the onus of security back onto the vendor. There's also legal reasons why it's a large organization might not want to start hosting other people's software. But at the end of the day, this is an easy way to just increase security. There's no scenario where someone can man in the middle of that unless the vendor itself has been taken advantage of. It is a design that we use at where I work. So I agree. The downside is that obviously you don't get delivery optimization, which is a concern for some people.
If it's something that people have sort of built their network strategy around optimization, this is like, you'll sort of see here that like the amount of stuff now they just completely or it's not that it bypasses it, it's just not built to work with it. So other things then that you'll need to think about is if you do have allowed lists of what traffic, where traffic can come into your networks, you're going to start having to open up a few more inbounds than you may have previously. If you're going, okay, we know that all this stuff is coming from these Akamai CDNs that Microsoft normally uses. That is not the case any longer. Okay, so let's just quickly then talk about some of the things around Winget with Intune. Now, I think Ben has already sort of covered a few of these things, but let's just sort of go through them to make sure that there's a couple of extra talking points in here. Some of it ties back to things that Ben was also talking about. But but we've already sort of mentioned that at the moment, the Microsoft Store is the repository. Now, what you'll find though is that when you do go into the Intune portal and you do a search for something, it's also going to show you things from the WPM repository as well, but they are going to fail when you choose it. It says, sorry, this is not available. Now, in terms of the way that, so the apps that are coming from the store that work, effectively, it seems like it's a pretty, like, I'd say, like, I haven't checked every app to say this, but I'd say it would be pretty much the same allow list of things from the store that Store for Business was able to access. So if you go through and things that that aren't appearing from that aren't available through Store for Business, you shouldn't see them coming from or you shouldn't be able to successfully install them from here. But moving forward, potentially, if they do, when they do open up some of the other options, maybe. But so far, the things that the Intune team have publicly commented on is in terms of, private repository support is coming, but the WPM integrations are basically, the public package manager location is something that the Intune team has got concerns about integrating that because of and I think, Ben, you basically said it earlier, where what goes into the store repository has got more stringent curation going on. Whereas with the WPM side of it, so far Microsoft is sort of being a little bit cautious here and saying that, we don't really know if we want to make it too easy for a large organization to potentially deploy things that they're not legally allowed to deploy. So I kind of understand Microsoft's side here. Like, sure, it's a pain. It would be nice if we could just go, but just screw it. Let me hit I accept I remove all responsibility from Microsoft if I accidentally get access to things that I shouldn't have. But I think Microsoft knows that's probably not going to end up in court. And it's always a bad story for Microsoft if Microsoft appears to be the distribution mechanism for inappropriately licensed software. Not allowed to say, not allowed to say pirated software. We'll call it mislicensed software. Okay, so if we just sort of go back to some of the private repository pieces, and Ben, you've probably sort of had to think or talk to some people about this stuff as well, but I don't know if I've got positive feelings about private repositories for most organizations.
It's an interesting conversation. Look, if we peel it back to just like functionally, what is the mechanism? As a repository service, I absolutely want this to succeed. I want this to be the thing that we use moving forward. I want to skip, 3 to 4 years into the future and everyone's just using Winget for the delivery mechanism, purely for the benefits afforded of being able to detect what's installed using Winget. I just think that's fantastic. Now, private repository stuff has always been tricky. Ask anyone who's decided to try and host their own PowerShell module galleries internally. It just becomes difficult. But I think if it's pushed correctly and done right, that for corporate, like core business applications that are proprietary, I see a benefit there.
Yeah.
But the question does need to be flagged with, is it better to create a WPM or a Winget repository, or do we just want to package it as an Intune Win package and deploy it that way?
I like the way you're thinking, Ben.
Remembering that if you package it as an Intune Win file, you get all the benefits of delivery optimization. You get all that fun stuff. Although if you have a locally hosted Winget repository and it is within the walls of your network, you don't necessarily need to worry about delivery optimization. So, there are a couple of thoughts around that. I think the idea of having your own repository is a fantastic thing to do. The selfish side of me is always curious to see whether there's a way that you could potentially have a licensed private repository, because wouldn't that be amazing for all those package management companies out there? So do you
want to hear my idea?
Sure.
As you're offering repositories as a service, including integration with Azure or Akamai CDN or whatever, because all that stuff is there. Being able to use something like eFlow or whatever to do on-prem deployments if needed, but still have management go back to like centralized management in Azure. So for me, it's like I understand why organizations are going to be drawn towards private repositories. Like no argument with why an organization thinks that's going to be a good idea for them. But but in terms of deploying it, basically, are you a global organization? What's your strategy for global deployments? Are you going to deploy multiple instances into each region? Are you going to integrate, as I mentioned, integrate with content delivery networks, etc.? And once you start sort of putting a lot of this stuff, you start thinking about all of this. It's like, well, hang on. All of a sudden, just Intune.WinApps going in is to me, it's I kind of all the things that I think would be positives. It's like, there might be that first download is going to suck if it's coming, but if we're also sort of thinking about a lot more people working remotely, etc. Again, delivery optimization doesn't make a bit of difference to that stuff anyway.
Yeah, precisely.
So I'm kind of leaning towards Intune.WinApps more than anything else here, until I see unless it's an org that's got very specific requirements about things not being able to leave on-prem networks or whatever logical reasoning they're providing. If it's just easy to say that an on-prem repository makes more sense for you because I don't care what your arguments are, I just want to move forward with this project.
So and this is more aspirational spitballing as opposed to what I think the future of this will be. But wouldn't it be great if the Intune portal or the endpoint management portal or whatever it's called today, instead of simply just being a place where you selected applications, it was a repository in Winget that any enrolled device was automatically enrolled to that repository. And then instead of leveraging the Intune management extension agent, which was Sidecar for a very long time, instead of leveraging that, which was basically just a hacked together solution to do this, if we simply said, we're going to use the Winget agent to pull down software, you are registered to a third-party repository, which is your corporate repository through Intune, then you could potentially get the benefits of DO. You could get all that sort of fun stuff. That's kind of where I see, where I would like to see it happen, where, the Winget as a concept is a fantastic thing. Let's leverage Intune as a mechanism to create those repositories. I don't know whether that's going to be a thing. That sounds like there's too many teams involved to make that dream a reality. But if I was in charge of architecting this solution, I would be making some deep cuts and making some big changes.
Well, the thing that was making me think about eFlow is that the DO team have already been working with that for the preview of non-CM connected cache. So they've already got some expert, or either they or someone they work with has got some expertise, at least in some of getting some of that stuff on-prem. So so some of that cross-team work, basically leveraging other tools that exist rather than trying to build everything from scratch. There's already a pretty good element of that in place here. Now, probably just the final thing down here is I've just posted in the links to the tech community post as well as the mechanics video on YouTube. It's the comments in there that I'm pretty sure that it's the tech community one. Let me just make sure before I pull it up on screen. And that's not Keller. Oh no, sorry. In this case, it's so here, Jason Sandis is the one who is responding to some of the, it's the usual thing where someone sort of jumps in and complains that it's terrible, etc. And Jason does a pretty good job of responding to that. But maybe it's the YouTube one. I'm sure I saw, unless I don't want to play that video. Sorry, Jeremy. Need to sort of do a quick search through here. I'm not sure where, like, apart from posting in Keller earlier, but in here it's if we, yeah, so Jason Githens obviously is involved here, but there's some other, oh, there we go. There's Brian Keller. I knew his name was in some of these comments. So yeah, so basically if you take a look at this, this is where you'll find that the, like normally, like I'm sure like most of you, you try your best not to read YouTube comments, but there in here I actually found that there was, it's a little bit different here versus your typical YouTube video that people are commenting on. So I'm just sort of looking at the comments there. Oh, okay, so I think Ben's. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I'm on the
Ben's
chat. Essentially, for anyone not following and for anyone watching on the video, Richard did have a question around the company portal, offline and online versions not being available anymore. That's basically down to the fact that they were delivered and available through the store for business. So that has changed, and the delivery mechanism is now through WPM or Winget.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've covered everything on there. So I didn't want to. So we are not going to go through all of the Winget commands.
Come on.
Unless you really want to. No. So out of here, I've just kind of pulled a few out of here, just so that you can get an idea of probably some of the important things as you're getting started with this. So rather than going through the list, I just thought it would be worth going through a few, and hopefully I put them in the correct order. I think I sort of put it from, not necessarily the most important, but from important through to things that the name itself gives you the details of what you need. So that's just the list straight from Microsoft in no particular order. This is the list, the order that we'll sort of just go through a couple here is just some of the things that I think are probably more important in here. So the first one, and let me just get this open so you can see it, is Winget settings. Oops.
You're in PowerShell 5 right now? The answer is yes.
Well, hopefully.
It's $PS ver table.
Oh, okay.
So
probably just the thing here to sort of watch out for is that when you do want to change the settings, you need to have something on your system, something installed that can open up JSON files. So they're basically saying, kind of makes sense, install VS Code. Probably no real arguments there. It's not the kind of thing that you probably want to be pushing down to users' devices. But probably the challenge, the reason why I sort of wanted to start off with this one, no, we can do that later, is that any of the settings that we put in here, I think at the moment there are like preview versions of ADMX files we can use for that, but I don't think there's an official published way of doing it through Intune just yet.
No, the easiest way to do this would be through just a PowerShell script, either as a script or as a configuration baseline, whatever it's called, proactive remediation.
Yeah. So hopefully it's something, or obviously it's something that's probably going to actually. I haven't checked settings catalog because actually I'm sure if it was in settings catalog, they would have made some noise about it going in. So that's something that just to sort of make sure that if you are sort of going, where are the settings? And I think the other thing as well with the settings file is it's not actually created until the first time you go to edit it. So by default, it would just be this section, and then you can go through and add in more sections. And we'll talk about some of the other things that you can add in. Now here with the network bit, you can see here that I've just got it set to DO for delivery optimization for the preferred download option. Alternatively, we could use like WinINet to go through and do that as well. So you've got some flexibility there, but like I'd say overall, I guess it's one of those things where each time I go back and look at the documentation, there's more that you can control versus originally there just wasn't. It's like, oh, okay, that's kind of it. So other things in here is that, we can change some of the defaults, but also we can try out experimental features. Now we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But basically, especially if you're running Insider, etc., you're always going to have some kind of, or if you're in Dev Channel, you're always going to have some kind of experimental features that you can choose to enable. And I think right now, what the experimental features I think are install from MSI, install from Zip, and there's one more experimental feature.
I'm checking the JSON schema for the settings as we speak. I just put a link in the chat. What do we got? Default, WinINet. Also, we're a dev user group now, just to let everyone know.
Okay, so here's experimental. Package dependencies was the other one.
Yep.
Actually, it looks like there's more than what I was actually mentioning. So, but this one doesn't seem to be mentioning Zip. Zip's not showing up in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pretty sure Zip is one of the other ones. So yeah, so again, it's something just sort of keep an eye on. There's new capabilities rolling in on a pretty regular basis here. But it's not like, oh, fantastic, great job. It's like, no, these changes have to roll in, and they have to roll in a pretty aggressive manner. If it's going to be ready for prime time sooner rather than later. Now, I think in terms of, just to sort of be careful with what I said there, in terms of us as individuals using this, there's a lot of really good stuff we as individuals with control of our own systems can do with it. It's that Intune side of it where things are, that we're not getting anywhere near the same level of functionality in terms of picking what and how we deploy things. Okay. Now, what else? So with Source, I think we've already spent a bit of time talking about some of this stuff, but this is, again, just sort of remember that we're talking about Winget at the command line here. So either using MS Store or using the package manager app repository. Now, you can pretty easily tell, which one where the things are coming from. Anything that's coming from the MS Store is effectively going to be giving you, let's just go to store.microsoft. Actually, let's just go to microsoft.com. Would I even spell Microsoft correctly? Do we have, I want to buy apps. How do I get apps? Or maybe, can we
do you want Forza 5?
Well, we might be able to, I'm thinking Xbox games might actually work for what I want to show here. Xbox games, I'm not 100% certain that it's going to work, but it might work. Let's choose Grand Theft Auto 5. Obviously not a recommend. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. So this ID here, so even though this is coming from Xbox, you can see it's coming from Store. And effectively, if you're going through the store and any of those codes that you're seeing in the regular Microsoft Store, basically that's the same code or ID that would get spat out at the command line from Winget. Now, one of the things that I was curious about was, so does this mean that?
Uh-oh. I think Mark may have disappeared. Let's just give him a minute, guys, and we'll see if he comes back.
Oh.
Uterin, you can keep us entertained if you want.
Oh, okay. I'm just walking to a Starbucks right now, so
nice.
Grab some. Yeah.
Right. Let me just send him a quick message. Is anyone while we're waiting for? Welcome back. Welcome back.
Yeah. So I haven't told you about the electrician I got in to make sure I could get stuff ready for my fiber deployment. I'll share that with you at the end of the session.
Yes, that's very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway,
Okay.
let's quickly do
Yeah,
this. So
so-
you were showing us the ID.
So the thing that I was curious about was if it was something that wasn't listed from the command line, could you just grab the code from the website or grab the ID from the website and try to do a deployment from the command line? No.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what the use case would really be there. Yeah, again, edge case scenario for going, oh, kind of found a hack. It's like,
So we did used
no.
to be able to do this back in the day. Back in the day, it's terrible that I'm saying these terms, but when the store was still the store, we used to be able to get those IDs, and we used to be able to subvert and find hidden applications. So things like Notepad and calculator and stuff like that all existed, but they weren't available visibly in the store.
Yeah.
But we could find the IDs and we could do fun stuff with that. So
Yeah.
I think what this is showing is that the Xbox store is still running on the old store framework.
Yeah.
And that's kind of potentially what I was trying to allude to when I was asking Quack whether Xbox owned store, because it very much did. The store was pushed in its framework by Xbox because they needed a delivery mechanism for their games.
Yeah.
And then we hacked our way into getting it to work for enterprise. But obviously I'm not officially stating any of this.
Well, they're the one, but if you think about it, like, they are the team at Microsoft that, like, so even though I'm sure the traffic they have to distribute pales in comparison to what Windows Update in general has to distribute, they have to do a better job of dealing with things that are up, over 100 gig in size versus, most, probably the most common things would be a meg or less for Defender definition updates through Windows Update.
Sure.
And then your peak periods would be your semi-annual, or sorry, your annual channel releases. This is, Xbox would be, constantly stress testing themselves there. And the
Absolutely.
way that I kind of
I mean,
know
even
that
think like a full OS update would only
Yeah.
be a couple of gig at most,
Gig,
whereas
yeah.
Games these days are clocking 60 to 70 to 100 gig.
Yeah. And I finally got around to finally picked up a Xbox Series X, and I said, oh update the games that I've got to Series X capable versions, thinking it'd be a couple of gigabytes each.
Yeah,
Oh no, it was 1.45 terabytes of updates. And
Wow.
that was for like 10 or 15 games or something. And it was basically reinstalls of those games. It was not an upgrade, it was a complete reinstall.
Yeah, sure.
Now, so then the other thing here then in terms of the source is that, okay, so they're the two default repositories. And this is where you've got pretty much a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do in terms of adding other repositories, etc. But so far, I just haven't seen a lot of documentation in general from, around how do we actually set up a repository that works the way that this works. So I don't know if that's kind of a deliberate thing at this point in time where they're saying, look, it's kind of, to me, that would be something where if it's a private repository, kind of that documentation would come out, probably the same time as, when they're ready to start previewing private repositories via Intune. So I kind of understand why we're not seeing a lot of that information there. And then the final bit down here is this is sort of just going back to like an org that, and I think education would be another, again, education would be the perfect scenario for this, is where they do put, basically it is an allow or a block list of what sites students can get access to. This is going to be quite a different world versus what they are used to, where MS Store, they could have assumed that pretty much, everything was sort of coming from a handful of servers or IP ranges, etc. That's not the case once we move over to the Winget world. So just be prepared to see traffic coming from sites that you have not seen a lot of traffic from in the past. And it's not necessarily an issue. It's just, as Ben mentioned, Adobe is handling the storage of a lot of Adobe content now, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, it does get to the point, with what Patch My PC do, we've got a lot of documentation around everything in our catalog and where it's coming from. Because that is a real concern that lots of our organizations that are our customers need to know what they're allowed to, what they're opening up to get access to. So we have that documentation. Now you can get the metadata on what a package is actually doing if you interrogate it correctly. So, you know, in a real world scenario, it might be worth going through what applications do you actually want to deploy through Winget or WPM through Intune, make a decision on what that software is, and then interrogate each one to find out the actual URL, where that's coming from, and then use that as an approved list on your firewalls.
Yeah, but be prepared to manage it in an ongoing manner.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And so then the other thing that I mentioned, is that, you will need to, and as Ben just mentioned, some of those changes in terms of, if you are trying to control everything coming in and out, this is going to impact it. Now, probably just here on the search is that, we just type in search, we type in the text string that we want. And basically, at the moment, it's pretty easy to see, is it coming from the store or the package manager repository? If it's got a name that if it's got an identifier that makes sense and you can read it, such as Office365.apps or something, it is not coming from the store. If it's that 10 or 12 digit or whatever ID, then it's coming from the store. So it's pretty easy for you to tell which is which. Now, I think we've just got a couple more that I want to talk about before we just open it up a bit more. With features, we've already mentioned some of the things around the experimental features, which we need to go through and enable through Package Manager. Now, I think if I just type in Winget features, that should show me. Okay, so what have we got? So we've got dependencies, MSI installation. Okay, I was right. I was pretty sure that zip install was there, even though that GitHub page didn't seem to highlight it. But then the open log, the open logs. So basically, these are preview features that if I wanted to enable them, that I could. And even if you take a look at some of the names of these things, you can already start to get a bit of an idea of what each of them are, and you can also quite easily start, understand. Oh, I kind of understand the importance of something that might be something that's packaged up inside of a zip file or having to deploy an MSI. So nothing too surprising in those ones. Now, other things as well, this is probably the last one that I want to talk about, is on the info side. And so some of the things that, if you haven't played with Winget previously, as you'll see as you sort of go into, as you sort of use a repository for the first time on a particular machine, etc., it's going to be asking you to accept licenses. You have to accept EULAs. So just sort of be aware of that stuff. And again, this is just something where it's a lot of it, I think, so far with the two options you're getting is just Microsoft covering themselves. But then you'll also get, depending on what it is, what packages you're pushing out. And I think it's also something that's more prevalent when you're getting it from the package manager repository, is you'll also see a lot more of the individual application vendors. So you'll see more of the ISV EULAs as you're going through there as well. Whereas I think if you're deploying just using the old store apps, I don't think, from memory, I don't really think I've seen that many things where I've had to accept the EULA for an app I want to deploy. But if it's something that I'm doing through Package Manager repository, then I'm pretty sure that is where you are going to see a lot more per ISV EULAs that you'll need to agree to. And hopefully that's just something that means that it's like it recognizes that ISV so that you don't have to say agree to 20 different Adobe agreements or EULAs on a machine, for example. Now, the other thing down here was just this bit here about the group policy state. And we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier that so far there are some so there's basically some preview ADMX templates available, I think, that allow you to start putting some of the settings in place here. But it's, I think it's still very, very early days. And of course, you can imagine anywhere where they talk about the group policy piece, everyone jumps in and says, what about Intune? What about MDM, etc.?
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of a completely valid thing to discuss here, because we're talking about cloud-based software distribution, but you're not talking about supporting Microsoft's cloud device management tool. It's like, but I think that gives you a bit of an indication as to just, and I think this ties into some of the things we spoke about last year, is that group policy is not going away. Any of us who thought it may have been at any point in time,
Listen, I was
think we were,
optimistic for a while,
yeah.
but then the bad people won. So now we've got
Yeah.
group policy forever.
Yes. So embrace it. Now the rest of the rest of the ones on the list, like I'll just sort of jump back to that list so you can take a quick look. They're probably not worth spending too much time on here. Actually, they're probably the only other two that I want to talk about in here, because the rest of them are fairly self-explanatory. Hash is just when you want to submit things for publication, so we won't worry about that one too much down here. But with export and import, we can export what we've got installed on a machine and then use import. So it exports the JSON file. Then we can import the JSON file onto another machine so that basically that is now, here are the apps I want you to install on this machine. So if we're kind of looking at a way to do like a non-Intune deployment of apps, so I sort of view export and import more as stuff that we would do ourselves just to test something out, as opposed to it being something that, like, I don't really see those. Actually, I shouldn't say this because I was about to say I don't really see organizations using this functionality, but the more I realize it, of course they are. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you create a JSON file with essentially an orchestration list of all your apps.
Yeah.
You've just built task sequences in Intune, and
Yes.
you are the worst person in the world, but you exist and you will do that. That is the thing.
Yeah. Like just because it's something that works doesn't mean you should do it. But for our own machines or whatever, like I think it's fine. And it might, for us, it might be a bit of a workaround until we see more of that functionality we want in a more manageable environment, as opposed to just deploying JSON files out to machines. Okay, but otherwise the rest of them are pretty straightforward. So things like installing, etc. Listing what's installed. Now, if you do a list, probably just the thing there is it's not just the packages that have been installed by Package Manager. It's whatever. Basically, it's other things that are installed on your machine as well. So just be careful with list. You might see a bunch of things and go, I didn't use WPM or Winget for those. It's like, don't worry. It's just more of an overall list, not a filtered list. But otherwise,
it's also a good mechanism to use if you wanted to do software inventory and you don't have any software inventory tooling.
Yeah.
It's better than using WMI tools.
Yeah. So pretty much from there, like I guess before we sort of do switch into general discussion, just any final talking points, questions, concerns, etc., that people have got either about Winget as a standalone command line tool, or in terms of the Intune integration and where that's headed, and things like timeframes, etc.
Did we say talk about timeframes?
No, because I wanted somebody to ask, and it's like there are no timeframes.
Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of timeframes, I think that end of Q1 or end of first quarter is kind of something that is not just my view or my opinion, is if they stick to that time frame for when they disable, remove, whatever, the store for business, other things have to align with that and be ready to go before they can retire that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean that end of Q1 becomes end of H1? Like I try to be an optimist, but the fact that they're still telling us end of Q1 without being more specific is just sort of making me think that, maybe there's still a little bit of wiggle room there. Yeah. Don't quote me on that though. That's just based on opinion and very vague time frame messaging that has not been updated in a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the timeframes of these things are going to be interesting. I'm glad I don't work in this space. As soon as they announce something, people start screaming, and if they announce it too early, then people start screaming louder. If they don't announce anything at all, people start screaming even louder. So There's no real way that anyone wins. So I don't know. It'll be out when it's out.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, out of everyone that's on the call, I know everyone's been very quiet, but now's your chance to not be quiet. Who's actually been playing around with Winget and WPM? And if so, have you been using it in Intune? Feel free to leave comments in the chat. We'll probably stop recording soon so that
so I'll stop recording now just in case someone's got something that they want to share but don't want it going on any kind of permanent record to be held against you in the future. So I'll just stop that recording.